So the next section is going to deal with authentication from the token-based aspect. So what we need to do is hook into JWTSessions. We installed it in the first video, I think, in the gem install. So if you haven't already, we'll need that in your gem file and you can run bundle. From there, we're going to actually hook into the actual class of JWTSessions and start doing stuff that's token based. We're going to hook into local storage. We're going to access cookies and set local storage values to configure if the user is logged in or not. So that's how we're going to be able to do it and communicate to our Rails app through our Vue app that we're logged in and someone can access the API we're talking to, which is what we just created in the last video. There's work to be done on our API. I haven't finished it, but it is in a state to where data can be created and destroyed and updated, all of that. So thanks to Rails scaffolding, it really pays off in this instance. If you haven't set things up in the API, skipped ahead, maybe you want to go back and make sure you do that. So an artist we don't really need to permit that, I don't think. I'm going to avoid controllers for now. We'll come back and soup these up a bit once we get more logic in the pipeline. First thing I want to do, set up our application controller to hook into JWTSessions. And what that's going to do is basically allow us to hook into that class and do things with some of the methods it provides, as well as verify a lot of things that are through header responses. So it's all going to be JSON based, hence the name. So I'm a little green on this personally. I'm not going to lie and say I know everything there is under the sun for this to work. I'm just trying to walk you through what I learned along the way. So hopefully you can learn something too. If it's not quite clear, don't worry. But as with anything, practice makes perfect. So in our application controller, I'm including this class. And it's essentially the groundwork for getting JWTSessions to work. I do want to do a rescue from, which is built-in from Rails, but we can hook into some bits of JWTSessions here, the errors and unauthorized. So we could say, what method should we respond with? And in this case, it'll say not authorized. So we need to create that method. And that can happen down under a private method in our class here. So I'll indent that and we'll say it's the same name, so not authorized. And then what we can do is just say render some JSON. Here, like normally you might feel like, oh, I'll render a view, but in this case you can't because you're using an API. So we need to render actual data back. So we can just say not authorized in this case. And set the status of the headers to unauthorized. And make sure it's lowercase. So that's just setting a response, and it returns a certain code to your browser so it knows what's up. And you can view all that in your dev tools. In Chrome is not my daily thing, but it does have a nice Vue plugin that's nice to see certain data that comes back on things. I'm using it just for this series. But what I'm getting at is the application that will look at things like local storage, the network. This is where you can see some responses and stuff that come back in your headers. But anyway, we can look into that when we get to it. Let's get our controller set up a little bit more. We will need access to our current user, and I'm going to go ahead and include this now. And since we're basically not using devise and creating our own, we can hook into current user ourselves by just creating this method. So we'll create an instance method of current user. It'll set it to that or set it to user.find payload and then user ID. So payload is going to come from JWTSessions. So we'll get into how that works in a second as I create up some more controllers. Before we go further though, I need to do an initializer for the JWT gem. This is going to be important to include as a token. It's just kind of a security thing. We also need to touch on cores here in a second. We'll create a file called JWTSessions.rb in that, we want to just basically have this string dot encryption key equals secret. Please use something else than secret. This is a way you could include some bit of code that doesn't get encrypted, or whatever that does get encrypted on the production side, so no one can steal your access privileges and whatnot. There's more to know there in the documentation if you want to look up the gem, so definitely read that. Actually, I really recommend it. So aside from that, we can go down and start thinking about our SignUp endpoint. But before I do that, I want to deal with our origins. So cores by default, this is commented out. It's because we're not automatically always using this gem. But when you install it, you can uncomment this line, these lines. And origins, here you can pass comma separated values to whatever app you're going to deploy or use. So in our case, we're going to actually let our Vue app talk to our Rails app, and that's going to happen through port 8081, I think. Possibly 0 if you're coming to this brand spanking new. I think mine's been running on this port. But just be sure to pass that through. We do need HTTP in front. Make sure you type it right too. So like I said, you can comma separate these. You can tell what methods to allow or any headers, etc. We do need to pass in credentials. True. So that's going to be important when we go to request sign in, sign up responses to our app. So don't forget that line. Let's go back and create a sign up controller. We're not going to scaffold this. I just want to do it by hand just to give you familiarity with how this works out of the box. So it's a token based route. So we can choose to either store those tokens client side as cookies or local storage. You can choose whichever land you desire there. I think we're going to go with both cookies and local storage. I can't remember. I think it's local storage mainly. But we still need to hook into the CSRF token that gets generated by Rails traditionally in a layout. You notice we don't have layouts here, but it still comes in the response. So CSRF is the cross site forgery. I can't remember the actual name, the acronym for it. That's terrible. It prevents cross-origin attacks. So security is important. You need that stuff in your requests just so things are secure. Maybe it makes sense to use a generator just to show you how I would go about this. Real simple. So I'll generate a controller on its own, and it will be called SignUp, and then we'll just make a create method on it. So by default, it's going to add a get route to our routes. We'll go back and remove that. I don't need it. But, well, I'll just do it now. That's why I didn't really want to do a generator, but it's okay. Right here, just remove that line for now. We'll come back and add a special route, which we need for our Vue app. So we'll be hooking into the JSON Web Token stuff here. So our create method's going to get a lot of logic here, because we're doing all this stuff from a different app, so we need to do more logic to make things work. So I'll just start with the general pattern we're going to use for other controllers, but I would just say brace yourself, because it's kind of nuts, but it starts to make sense as you dig in. So we can say we're going to pass in an instance of a new user with user params, which we'll define below. So I'll actually go ahead and do that on a private method. So this is like any other creation method, but we're using user stuff here, which is something we used to use devise for. So we'll do a similar route here, but it's all baked in our app instead of a gem, which is kind of nice. Password and password confirmation, which is basically your password again. Okay, so we're permitting those values. If a user is saved, we'll do something. We'll set a payload, which is what you saw in our app controller. Remember that? Cool. So that's going to come, and we're going to set user ID in a hash to user ID .id. And then we'll establish the session with the JSON Sessions gem. JSON Web Token Sessions gem. That's so much to say, sorry. In the session class. And then create a new payload, basically. So payload is payload, which we established here. And then we're going to do this method that comes with the gem called refresh by access allowed. True. And you're wondering where this stuff comes from. The gem homepage has a lot of this already spelled out. A lot of it's kind of just stuff I've gotten from this actual help page. So feel free to read over it if you want to. And then we'll get our tokens and say session.login. Okay, so then you can have a response and set a cookie. So here's where we're using cookies in local storage. So JWTSessions .access cookie. I'll do just separated values here. So value is going to be a token param that comes back. Just part of the response. HTTP only, true. And then secure. Basically, we're saying secure this HTTPS if the Rails environment is production. So it's just a quick one-liner to check that. Basically, it would say true or false if it was production or not. Okay, so then we can do render JSON, and we need our CSRF token as another param that comes back. And then we can do else render JSON and hash error user.errors.full messages. This is baked into Rails. Then we can join those with the space and set a status to the headers of unprocessable entity. If I can spell able entity. Okay. So that's just to sign in or sign up, excuse me. Our sign in controller is going to look fairly similar. We're going to be looking for a user instead of setting a user. So we'll be doing that next. Creating a new user with permitted parameters. We get those from our fields that we've already got on our user model. This one's coming by default with our bcrypt password, has secure password stuff. So that's just a nice nicety that Rails provides us with that gem. We're going to assign the user ID to the payload. We're going to pass that payload through to a session variable and create a session. We're going to set that cookie at the same time with the response. It basically says, okay, this user is logged in or not. And then we're going to render the final response as a like a actual safe response, or if not, we can go and get the errors back of why that didn't work. So while we're at it, let's create a sign in controller. I'm just going to create this one manually. So sign in controller. Kind of just go here. We'll just copy this back. Sign in. And you may be wondering, well, do we want to version this in our API? And I'm not. You might choose to. I feel like that would complicate the app quite a bit, though. You always need to be versioning your authentication, which would honestly drive me mad. So I would avoid that personally. So these would be in their own namespace and the routes, just a single path as opposed to a few levels deep. So what I'm going to do is go and do our sign up. So this one's going to have a before action. Authorize access request only destroy. If you come from the devise world, this is kind of like authenticate user. That comes from this gem as well. Where would it be? I think it's right here. Yeah, you can do stuff like that. So that's kind of important when you want the user to be signed in to do something. It's kind of just a quick way to check from the controller level. We'll do the same thing with the create method. We will need a private and I'll come back to that. We're going to need a not found method when the user can't be found if they try to log in with the wrong credentials. So we'll do find by in this case, but we're still in the create method. So that's kind of an interesting conundrum. So here we're actually creating, here we're finding. That's the big difference. But we're going to find by email because that's what I'm using as the main username in our app. And that's a field on our user model there. So if we say user.authenticate, again, that comes from bcrypt, I believe. We can pass in the params, password, and then we're going to do else and then end. So within the if, we'll set a payload again, another hash of user ID. Going to be user.id. A session is going to be another JWTSessions class with session new. Payload is payload. Then again, this refresh by access allowed is true. We'll get into where this method comes from coming up. We're going to create a refresh controller. And that's just essentially saying if things aren't good, refresh the whole session and make the user sign in again, which is kind of a fail-safe. So tokens, again, session.login. Then we'll do a response dot set cookie. JWTSessions dot access cookie, comma. We'll do this indentation here. Value is tokens access again. HTTP only true. And then we'll do another check for secure on production. Cool. So if all goes well though, there we will render JSON. And then the CRS of tokens. This is all through params that are coming back. Otherwise we'll do not authorized. And you may be wondering, where the hell is this? It's on our application controller. If you remember, we have this method here. Everything here inherits from application controller. So I have that access from there. So this is inheriting from it. Inheriting from application controller. So I actually have this method available to me. All right, so we need one more that is a destroy method. So this is to log out. This is to log in. This is to log out. So we'll just take the session and set it to the same stuff we've been doing. And then we'll do session.flush by access payload. Cool. And then we'll just say render we do need a method down here called not found. Actually might need to be right here. I feel like I explained that wrong. This should be not found. And then here we'll actually just have a method called not found. So I'm overstepped what I explained. Since this is a private method, I can't actually access it outside of here, I don't believe. So it would inherit, but I don't have access to it in this particular class. So it's a little bit different thanks to how Ruby treats private methods. So we'll render JSON back for this, and it's going to be an error. So we could just say error cannot find email password combination, and then just say status. Oh, actually, you know what? I was wrong. Authorize should be there, and then this is calling itself. It's kind of a weird way to be able to do that. Okay. So that's our sign in controller. The next one is going to be a refresh controller. And I think that might do it for our controllers. Sorry if this is long-winded for now. This is probably the hardest part to understand. It was for me anyway. So refresh controller .rb. So this one's going to be inheriting from the application controller too. Cool. So again, we want to do before action, but this one's going to be a little different. Authorize refresh by access request. Again, this comes from the docs, so feel free to read that stuff. There's a lot here. It's kind of complicated. Okay, so def create, and we'll do the same kind of concept here. It's going to be a session where we create using the class JWTSessions, and inherit session .new, pass in a payload. And it's going to be a claimless payload. We'll do the same refresh by access allowed true tokens equals session dot refresh by access allowed do. And we'll do arrays. So you could treat this different if you want. This is just a simple way to say, hey, this isn't what we predicted would happen. So we'll send back errors of unauthorized. It should be plural. And we can just say something's not right. So this is like if someone was like sniffing, trying to get in a different way they should. Response, we'll do the same kind of thing. So response dot set cookie. And we'll pass in JWTSessions .access cookie. Value again will be tokens. Access. HTTP only. It's true. And secure, we'll check on backend, our production. Then we'll finally render JSON CSRF. Cool. All right, I may have typos. I'll probably have to go back and double check everything here, but I will do so. So far, so good, I think. All this is just to set up the logic we need on the Vue app. So none of this will actually be anything we can actually access on, we can access it on the Rails app, but it's something we'll need to really hook into Vue to do much work with. So I am double checking my work, making sure I have everything updated that needs to be. Oh, okay. Yeah, on our controllers, why don't we update those in the very next video? Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.